Good morning, everyone. My name is Jan Schnellman. I'm with the Opioid Response Network. We're pleased to bring you this webinar on coalition sustainability today. Don't leave your change to chance, presented by Dave Chevelle. To get started, I'll welcome you all and thank you for remaining on mute when you're not speaking. And a reminder that this webinar is being recorded. We're pleased to bring this webinar to you at the request of Healthcare Authority of Washington with Erica Jenkins and Alicia Hughes at their request, who are on the line. I'm joined today, in addition to Dave, by Sean Moore at CADCA, along with Nick Shubiak, who is an implementation specialist at the ORN as well. I'm a technical transfer specialist, so I coordinate requests to the ORN, and I'll tell you briefly about the ORN on the next slides. We work with communities to address the opioid crisis. We're a SAMHSA grant, so as detailed here, and we support prevention, treatment, and recovery of opioid use disorders by offering technical assistance. Next is more about the ORN. We work with communities. I work in Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. And each state has a designated team. We're a national program. And we accept requests which can be made through our website for technical assistance, such as this. And the next few slides tell you a little bit more, and you can learn more about the Opioid Response Network by going to the website at opioidresponsenetwork.org. So now I'd like to turn it over to Dave, and this is a reminder of our mission and so on. But to get to the program, I'll let Dave introduce himself or reintroduce himself to you, and we'll talk about sustainability.
Great. Thank you, Jan, and thank you to our team for working to put this together. It's had a good collaboration with multiple organizations. And hello, everybody. My name is Dave Chevelle, and I am a contractor with CADCA, the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, who's a partner in all this process with the ORN. And it's a pleasure to work with you to talk about sustainability today. And I recognize just some of the names here. Some of us, we worked together last week doing a training in Washington. And I'll just say it's always a pleasure to work in Washington. You have, and I'm not biased at all, but you have the best prevention network. You have the best prevention data of all the 50 states in the country, which makes it the best in the world. It's just always a pleasure to work with you all because there's always so much support being provided by the state. And that's what this webinar is about in talking about building sustainability. Don't leave your change to chance. And so we are going to be talking about sustainability. We have about an hour to do this. I've given the team that we've talked about it, and and everybody here has an instruction. Please, you can use the chat box if you're able to. We'd love you to put comments in there. As many comments. If you have a question, if you want to add an example, if you want to speak up, put something in the chat box, or as far as we're concerned, just unmute yourself and start talking. It'd be great. We want to answer your questions, make sure we're able to meet your needs here today. When we talk about, and final point about that is if I'm going too fast or you want me to spend more time, provide some examples, please say slow down. Please say we'd like to hear more about that because again, we want to make sure you get the information you need about sustainability. When we do talk about sustainability, there are just kind of 3 points that overlay everything we're talking about. And you'll see throughout this webinar as we go through this. The first thing about sustainability is it's not about the money. A lot of people think it is, but it's really, and we'll see here, it's about building a strong organization that is worthy of people making an investment of their resources in. So we'll spend a lot of time about how we make, and we can work to make our coalitions, our organizations, those types of resources in the community, go-to organizations in the community that people will say, hey, we can't let this organization go away because it's so important to what we do. The second point about sustainability is it's really about the long term. Again, we've been working at substance prevention and this for a long time. The conditions change in our community. We're certainly in a strange set of conditions right now with COVID-19, but it takes a while to change conditions, root causes, risk factors, and ultimately the problems we're dealing with. And so sustainability is about being our coalitions or organizations being in this for the long run. And then finally, the third thing about sustainability is about if you're a staff to a coalition or you're working with coalition staff, it's not about the staff doing the work. It's about coalition members, coalition volunteers, coalition leaders owning the sustainability discussion, owning the sustainability effort. Because one of the things that if you think about it, if a coalition staff who's getting paid by the coalition goes out and says, we need to sustain the effort, we need your money, some people may be thinking, it may be true, really they're asking, I need to have my job sustained. And it's not about sustaining any one job, about sustaining any one fiscal agent. It's about the community sustaining its change effort so that we can put the processes, put the programs, put the strategies in place that will make the change that we want to see in our communities. So those are the key points. And again, just along that last time, it cannot be led, and we'll talk more about it as we go through this. This is really about how we engage our coalitions in addressing and building sustainability. And I didn't mention my name. Again, to introduce myself, I started a long time ago, 30 years ago, in Washington, in Thurston County as a coalition member. And I can't take any credit for this, but the coalition, Thurston Together, Thurston Communities Together, is still a coalition today. It's been active for 30 years. So coalitions can be sustained. Coalitions can make a difference in the community. And for the last 15 years or so, I've been working with CATCA, providing training. Some of the information you are going to hear about today are what we train to our coalitions throughout the country and actually throughout the world as we do these trainings on how to build a sustainable organization. So our objectives for today are to be able to, again, whether you're a coalition coordinator, you're working with the state, you're a technical assistance provider. I know we have some fellows on the call. As you're working with coalitions, our goal is to allow you to be able to have a conversation with coalitions, with members, with staff about why sustainability is important. And this session is not to teach you how to do sustainability, but to allow you and provide the tools so that you can go out, again, if you're a coordinator, technical assistance provider, and work with a coalition so they can assess their ability to sustain themselves, which includes looking at who are their members, who are their volunteer base, about looking at how do we use a planning process to effectively guide us, how will we continue to use that planning process, how we're making a difference in the community, and then finally we can talk about how we obtain the diversified resources to make sure we're able to sustain. And so one of the key outcomes of this session is for you to be able to go back and have those conversations with your coalitions, with coalitions you may be working with, to assess their ability to identify what are their next steps in building sustainability. Many of you filled out the survey to register for this. We thank you for that. We've, as a team, have had a chance to go over those surveys. And again, there's a lot of experience people already have. Some have said, we're good at one part of this, the questions you answered, which is part of sustainability, and we may need some work on others. So that's part of the goal for this, is to allow you to work with coalitions to do an assessment to say, where do we need additional support? And then toward the end, we'll talk about next steps, how you can obtain some of that additional support, about how do we actually do this? How can we build stronger membership base? How can we really get the word out about how effective our coalition is? So if you will, I always like to talk about after objectives is if you take a second, we'll have a few seconds of awkward silence here, but if you're taking notes, write down, given those objectives, what do you want to see in this webinar? You're going to spend the next 50 minutes of your time on this webinar. What do you want to get out of it? Write those down, make sure we meet those objectives, make sure you ask questions to get it. If you want to put some specific objectives in the chat box, please go ahead and do that. We will acknowledge those and make sure we cover those, or at least I know we can cover them later on. So I'll give you a few seconds to write down your expectations. I would say a few seconds of awkward silence. So when we talk about the definition of sustainability, you can read here, but a sustainable coalition has enough resources to intervene at the community level and can maintain those resources long enough to see community level outcomes. And I'll also ask you if you want to speak up or put in the chat box. What do you see as key to that definition of sustainability? What are some of the key terms there? Anybody dare to put a comment in the chat box? Usually I can count on Erica to make a few points. Maintain resource, maintain outcomes, good resources. Good, good. And I love it, participation. I love it's exactly right. And I love how you're all keying on resources. It's not necessarily about the money. When we look at resources, we're looking at human resources, we're looking at facilities, we're looking at in-kind resources and money, but ultimately it's about having all the resources it takes to achieve the change we want, and about the community. It really is about community level outcomes and how do we achieve those, which means engaging the whole community and engaging long enough. Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. So when we talk about sustainability, and this is one of the more technical terms we use at CADCA, there are 4 things, our technical term, 4 things that coalitions must sustain in order to achieve sustainability, in order to last long enough. It's about having a strong volunteer membership base, meaning without those members, without those volunteers, we really don't have a coalition. We're an agency, we're an organization. It's about having a credible process, and we've used the Strategic Prevention Framework or the CPWI Prevention Framework. But what process guides our work? And we'll talk more about that. If we don't use a process, coalitions will fall into activity traps where we don't have data, we don't have a plan, let's just do something that feels good. That eventually dies out. So we want to make sure we use a process. We are relevant to community concerns. People won't know to support us, to provide resources, unless they know what we're doing, unless we're meeting their needs and we're contributing to the health and safety, overall health and safety of the community. So it's important that we do these things, and then we can say, okay, how do we obtain the resources in order to continue doing this work? Now, I don't know if some of you may have seen the movie Jerry Maguire, and if you want to speak up or just say, what were some of the noteworthy phrases from Jerry Maguire? Anybody want to venture? It's a movie. What are some of the phrases we've seen from Jerry Maguire?
Show me the money.
Show me the money. And there's a couple other phrases I'm thinking about before we get to show me the money. People are putting in that. Help me help you. That's about sustainability, how we can help our community. I'm looking for one more. Is you had me at hello. Thank you. Thank you for that one, Sean. So when you think about it, is if we as a community are going to be looking to the community and others to provide resources, before we go and ask for resources, we want to be able to show that we've been able to engage volunteers and been able to really engage sectors of the community, get people involved in our work. We've got a credible, data-driven, evidence-based process we're using, and we make a difference. We're addressing those community concerns. So before we can ask people to show us the money, we have to basically, they have to say, when we go ask for the money, is they'll say, you had me at hello. I knew all about you. I knew what your coalition was about. I knew the contributions you make to the community. I'd love to support you in your community work, in how you're addressing the community. So again, if we have them at hello, they're more likely to want to show us the money, show us the resources. And that's a good way of looking at these 4 things. So thank you for that. And someone, Sean actually never saw it, but he's heard the sayings. A little side one says, at a training once, and someone was texting when I was doing this, and I was getting annoyed they're texting, and they were looking up Jerry Maguire. They had never heard of the movie, so I need to update my movie references. So one of the things that we have provided in the activity, in the note pages that we've provided, and Jan will provide a link, and many of you should have received those, or we can provide the actual document if we're able to, is there is a checklist, and we encourage you to, as we go through this, you can look at that checklist, but our intention as we go through these 4 things is to really walk through, and you'll see as we walk through them, it really addresses each element that are included in this checklist. And so intention is that you'll be able to go back to coalitions that you may be a coordinator for, or that you work with, or that you're a member of, and use this checklist to say, how are we doing in addressing each of these 4 things? Are there areas that we need technical assistance on? So again, we're not going to go through, we don't have time in an hour to teach all of these things, but again, identify, be aware of what they are so you can go have those conversations. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's not about you filling out or one person in a coalition filling out the checklist. It's about engaging the coalition in a discussion, whether it's at a coalition meeting or you're creating a sustainability work group or subcommittee, having that group go through and do this checklist so they can make their decisions about, again, where does our coalition need to work on it as we build a sustainable coalition. And thank you, Jan. I see you're providing, or Erica provided that link. Thank you for that. So the first element is building a strong, and I'll say before I go on, any questions or comments or people unclear about the purpose of the checklist and how we're using the checklist? Okay, and you'll see we'll refer to the checklist as we go through. So the first element of building a sustainable coalition is having a strong volunteer and membership base. And again, as we said, without volunteers, without members, without coalition partners, we really don't have a coalition. So it's really about how and there's different aspects of that. One is when we recruit people, and it's asking, and we engage them in the work, it's asking, how are we doing that in a way that gives them something to be involved with the coalition? When we recruit people, are we just asking them to come to a coalition meeting, or is there a reason why they're involved with the coalition? Again, being a member of a coalition, if you ask someone what their role on the coalition is, and they say, well, I come to your meeting and I eat your chicken sandwiches, that's not necessarily an active role on the coalition. And one of the things they found in terms of sustainability is why people stay involved with coalitions and volunteer groups is 2 reasons. One is that they feel they play an active role in the work of the coalition, in the work of the work group, and they feel they're involved in active decisions. So as we're recruiting people, are we making sure that they have a role, that there's a committee, there's opportunities for them to get involved? Are we providing training to them? If we're asking them to serve on an assessment committee, are we training them and providing the right resources for them to be successful in working on that particular committee? And then the second reason why people get involved and stay involved with coalitions is typically they have a relationship with somebody on that coalition, and they stay involved because they like the people or they have a good relationship. So when someone comes to a coalition meeting for the first time, are they connected with somebody? Do they know somebody? Is there someone that after the meeting you're going to call up and say, I noticed you attended the meeting. What did you think of it? Is there a place for you to get involved? What role? How can we support you in staying involved with the coalition? So it's about creating an atmosphere in our coalition that welcomes people, but welcomes people to become actively involved. Do we make decisions at our coalition meetings, or do we just at our coalition meetings do networking where we're just giving information to people? I can read that on the internet. I can read that on a newsletter. But if I'm taking my time to go to a coalition meeting, am I actively involved in that meeting? So as we're recruiting people, we want to make sure we're recruiting them in a way that allows them to become involved in the coalition, and there's a reason for their being there, which relates to retaining people. And this is the 6R portion of our training, where we call the pirate portion, the pirate portion of our training, but really to sustain it. And this is where coalitions can look, I want to say systematically, but are we building these types of things into the ongoing work of our coalition? Do we have ways that people can build relationships? Do we do social things? Do we make sure everybody knows each other's names at a meeting? Do people have a role on the coalition? Do we have sector reps? Do we have members involved? Are members involved in chairing the committees? Do we respect people? Do we start on time? Do we end on time? Do we keep on track? If someone's coming to a coalition meeting and they get to and they're there because of the third item on the agenda, and we only spend the whole meeting on the first 2 items, they just wasted their time at our meeting. So do we work through and have an agenda that honors everybody's potential involvement? Do we recognize and reward people? Again, we can recognize and reward people simply by shouting out at a meeting, so-and-so did this. We can put their names in our newsletters. Coalitions have ways that we recognize people. If there's a volunteer, the coalition can send a letter to their personnel file thanking their supervisors for their involvement with the coalition. Again, people are more likely to stay involved when we honor them, we respect them. And the last one is results. So how does our coalition share results back to members? If they were involved in a data collection and a part of the assessment, do they see the final assessment report? Do they have some say in what the results of that assessment are? As we go through this work, we don't want to wait 2 years till a student survey comes out and hope the numbers are positive. Let's celebrate those good events that happen, those milestones that we achieve, those activities, those events that happen throughout, and recognize people for their involvement. And so Samantha's saying that the 6 R's are very helpful. And again, you can just, and it's not just doing these, it's how do we institutionalize them? For instance, some coalitions, after a meeting, they meet quarterly, they send handwritten letters. When's the last time you received a handwritten letter? A handwritten thank you note for their participation in the coalition. If I get a handwritten thank you note for someone, I'm going to feel honored. So let's give that to a committee. That could be, again, who wants to be on that committee, but so it's their responsibility to make sure those notes go out so the work is spread out among people. But let's make sure that's in that committee's job description, or we get volunteers that like to do that. We can put that in that volunteer, make that assignment, recognize them for that. The whole point is let's build these efforts into the ongoing work of our coalition. Got through these fairly quickly, just looking, any questions about this? And again, when you look at the checklist, you can say, are new members actively recruited? And again, it's easy to go through this checklist and say, yes, or we sort of do. If one person does it, that's all you're doing. I'm pointing out my screen here if you haven't noticed. That's all one person is doing. However, if you go through and you have a sustainability committee, or you do this with the advisory board or the steering committee of a coalition or the whole coalition, you get a discussion about, are we really training volunteers? You can ask a new member and say, were you trained? And really have a discussion about each of these points. Do people have clear roles and responsibilities? If we go around the room and say, what's your role in the coalition? And I'm sure some people will say, I come to your meetings. Then we can say, okay, how do we provide you with an opportunity to work on the coalition? So that's the purpose of these checklists, to engage, allow you yourselves and others to engage in a coalition with a discussion. Questions about, again, the first part, strong volunteer and membership base. Comments? And again, our purpose is not to train these. I get excited about these, would love to train them. And we'll talk in the end about next steps. If you want additional training and support, that can be provided for you. As I mentioned, Washington State has a great infrastructure that supports you, and you can get additional support on any of these topics.
Dave, this is Nick. I just wanted to comment. I really loved how you talk about the R's, because a lot of those things are seemingly intuitive, right? Things like respect. But really, when you talk about them, you're talking about like how to operationalize them, like how to do actually specific things to make sure that we're demonstrating that or doing that. And I think a lot of times getting together and forming these relationships, we would all agree that's a good thing to do, but a lot of times we don't take the time to really think about how are we actually going to do that. So I was like, so helpful how you gave those examples to the R's. So thanks for that.
Thank you for that, Nick. And I was thinking about it. It's as simple as having, if you have times on your agenda, we're going to meet 10 minutes here. Do you have a timer, someone whose responsibilities say, hey, that's 10 minutes are up. We need to move on to the next topic. Do we need to shelve this? What do we need to do? And you give that person an opportunity to interrupt and to do that. So thank you for that. And it's about thinking of each of these. What's the best way that if the staff changes or if leadership changes, we'll continue to do these things over the life of the coalition. Okay. Next piece here is the 4 things coalition must sustain. The second is a credible process. And again, in Washington, I say you're right across the border. I didn't mention I live in Portland, Oregon. So I feel close to Washington still. But you've got the DBHR Community Prevention and Wellness Initiative Planning Framework, which is the same thing as SAMHSA, the Substance Use Mental Health Services, administration strategic prevention framework, whatever framework we're using, it's how do we build that in, as Nick just mentioned, how do we operationalize that and build that into the ongoing work of our coalitions? And that's the thought. You can say, well, we have an assessment, but do you have an assessment that's every January when the youth survey results come out? Does our community assessment team meet to update our community assessment? In whatever time is, once a year, do we have a planning retreat where we revisit our strategic plans and we do our planning for the next year? If we do that on an ongoing basis, that helps sustain the coalition. It keeps us focused, updated on the community as we redo our assessments. It keeps us from, again, I mentioned earlier, falling into that activity trap. Meaning when we've noticed, and it's very clear when coalitions don't have current plans, when they don't follow their plans, then it's people sitting around a table saying, what do we do next? Someone will say, hey, I have an opportunity, let's hold this, let's get the youth, they want to do an activity, that's great, but that may not necessarily meet the priorities of the community. And let's build those youth activities into priorities that are based on what our plans have identified. So we want to really keep using these processes to inform our work and do them on an ongoing basis. And again, this is not intention to train all this. This is if you are familiar with CADCA, we do a 3-week National Coalition Academy that walks through these over 3 weeks. And we also recognize in Washington, you have great resources for supporting these. The challenge is to say, where are we? What areas are we good at? What areas may we need more work on as a coalition? How do we train our members in doing some of these activities? So we want to be able to say, when we talk about a credible process, is what process are we using? Is it the SPIF? Is it the CPWI process? How are we using? What guidance can we get? What are the products? When you think about, when we train this, we talk about a community assessment, a logic model, a strategic and action plans, evaluation plan, sustainability plan. What are those products? How often do we as a coalition use those products? And how often do we update those products? And are they current? Are they really using those products to guide our work? Another aspect of this is, look on the lower left here, is the organization chart. Where is the work being done? If you're not doing some of this work in committees, if the steering committee isn't taking responsibility, if it falls on staff, well, what happens when that staff leaves or when funding ends? Then all those skills, all that knowledge about how to do these things leaves with them. So we want to really engage the coalition in doing the work, and we always say that people own what they create. So if we have a work group that creates the assessment, they can share their assessment with the entire coalition. They're going to own that assessment. They're going to want to see that the coalition uses that assessment. The same for the logic model. If a committee creates a logic model, they share that with the coalition and say, here's what we've come with from all your input. These are the priorities. Then the coalition, that work group owns it, and the coalition will work with them to make sure we address those priorities. If I come up with that as a staff, or one or two of us, and I show it to the coalition, that's my logic model. I own it. And again, people own what they create. The more people involved in creating and sharing these products, the more they will own those products. And then finally, having timelines that say, when will this work be done? Which is critical, so that we know that we hold ourselves accountable as a coalition, and also we can revisit the timelines year to year to say, okay, it's time for us to revisit our assessment, time for us to update our logic models and strategies. So the whole point here is that let's build these processes and operationalize them into our ongoing work. So we know, as I mentioned, every January that community assessment work group meets and they update the assessment, they look at the survey, and we revisit and we redefine our priorities. Have we learned anything new? Are there new conditions that we need to address in our community? Oops. Yeah, so that's looking at the processes. Do we use a planning process at all? How do we use that? Again, Washington State, you're provided some wonderful support for that. Are members involved in the process? Who's making those decisions? We say people own what they create. People own what they decide. If I'm involved in decision making, I'm more likely to want to follow up to make sure those decisions are followed through on. We use planning products to guide. I'm also doing right now one of these academy training, and we just did a polling with the group, and we have 20 coalitions, and we were covering a resource assessment. We put a poll up, how many are using their resource assessment, and really only about half are using their resource assessment. So that says, one, that they don't own it, they may not have an assessment, but a resource assessment is valuable because that shows who our partners are. That shows how we can build off the strengths of our community. So that's just as an example to see, is our coalition really understanding and owning these processes? And do we do it on a regular basis? Any questions, or Nick, anything to add about, you're my spokesperson here, my support. Anybody want to add or ask questions about this credible process? And again, a good way to check this is to just at a coalition meeting ask, how many have seen a logic model? How many have seen our plans? And a lot of times, if a coalition has multiple grants, you're receiving different funding, you've submitted different plans to each of these grants or each of these funders, you may have, there may be 3 or 4 different strategies on the plate. The more transparent we are, if I can use that word, with our coalition members, the more they see, hey, there's too much work for one staff person for people to do. We as a coalition need to step up if we're going to achieve these things and really own and prioritize these plans that guide us in our work. And so they need to see the plans, and they'll see the value of the plans the more transparent we are with us.
Dave, I was just going to add, I think that's such a great way to talk about it in terms of that transparency. And it's not that organizations are trying to hide this stuff. It's again, just something that typically we don't make the operational effort to share it. And when we share it and talk about it in this way, everyone learns the language, everyone's informed, and that better helps communicate what it is that we're talking about. And I think that can have a great parallel process within the organization and the message we're trying to send outside the organization. So it's just really helpful the way you frame that.
Thank you. And that transparency is so important. And I'm just thinking, some people will say, you know, we've written these plans and we only have 10 people at the table. We can't do everything. Well, in some sense, in my mind, good. Let's show the plans to those 10 people and say, okay, what's important for us to take on now? Let's let them decide which and prioritize what we take on, and let's do a fewer things right and completely rather than try and hit and miss and try and do a whole plan. But the point is, when they prioritize and own that prioritization, they're more likely to see it through and understand where those strategies fit into the bigger strategy. So the next piece is relevance to community concerns. And this is one where it's important for the coalition to be seen as, if we're going to ask the community to continue to support the coalition, and that support is in terms of volunteer hours, it's in terms of partners, whether it's the police or the schools or the government or the faith community or service providers to come to coalition meetings, they need to know that what the coalition is doing is relevant to what they're interested in, and that the coalition is supportive of, and what the coalition is addressing impacts their work as well and supports them in their work. And so a lot of times when, a way of looking at this, when coalitions are going out and introducing themselves, a lot of times the coalitions will say, well, here's our coalition, here's when we meet, come to our coalition meetings. And what this is almost saying is, here is our coalition, here's what we do, how can we support you in doing your work? If we can support the police department, if we can visibly support the schools, all these other sectors, they'll see the value of the coalition and they'll see the value of what we're doing. And when it comes time to support the coalition, they'll say, hey, this coalition is too valuable, I said this before, for it to go away. We need this coalition. It plays a vital role in our community. So one way of looking at the community and the role of the coalition is to just recognize that, if I can use my fancy animation here, that coalitions, at least the funded ones here that we're talking about, typically have a specific topic. Some may be general, but the ones we do, the ones that we're talking about, typically are looking at substance use and misuse. Yet if I go down to a coffee shop in any of your towns or any town, or go down in front of a Walmart and ask people what are their concerns, They're going to say, I'm concerned about jobs and employment, housing, homelessness, COVID-19. There's a lot of different concerns that people have. And right now, substance use and misuse may not be high on their priority. So why would they want to support or be involved with the coalition? And what our challenge is to be able to do, and I'm going to challenge you all in a second, our challenge is to be able to say, what is the relationship between what we're doing and someone who cares about education? And that's an easiest one. Youth, if they're involved with substances, they're less likely to do well in school. They're less likely to go to school. And we want to make sure that they have all the advantages in the world and they can take advantage of their education. And so we know the link between substance use and misuse and education. We can make those links otherwise. If we look at housing and homelessness, we know there's clearly a link around people that are homeless, maybe experiencing co-occurring disorders, mental health issues, substance use issues, or other issues, or housing issues. And so it gives us an opportunity to talk to the folks that are housing, folks that work with the homeless population, and say, how can we work together? What can we do? Can we provide resources for you when you're working with someone who's trying to find a home and you're providing that service? Can we provide services to you that they get access to other health-related resources in the community? How can we support you in your work with your population? So you can look at any one of these topics and say, for people that are interested in that, what is the relation to that particular issue? What are organizations that care about that? How can the coalition support those organizations? And so your challenge is, if we look at potholes, I always throw this one in here, what is the relationship between substance use and misuse and potholes? We'll see how you are awake 20 minutes before lunch. Can anybody think of what is the relationship between?
I got one, Dave, if no one else does.
Okay.
This is fun. I like this.
Yeah. Anybody, Nick, go ahead. You're on a roll.
So connecting potholes to substance use disorders, if you think of the opioid epidemic and the impact that it's had on the workforce, and how, we can't fix the infrastructure of our community without a healthy workforce. And so our coalition to support and keep the health of our community safe is also helping keep our roads safe.
And who cares about that workforce? What are the individual organizations that cares about keeping the workforce healthy?
I'm sorry?
Who are the organizations and individuals that care about keeping a healthy workforce?
I don't know.
Well, it's businesses, it's government officials. And another aspect of that is, if we don't have a healthy workforce and people aren't making money, there's not enough tax revenue. And another way of looking at this is, if politicians may be concerned about, well, if we're spending our money on safety and drug-related issues, we don't have money in our government budgets to fill potholes. So if we can decrease the impact of substance misuse on workmen's comp, on healthcare costs within our government and also in businesses, we get more tax revenue, then we'll be able to fill potholes. And so all this comes together to say, if we can let politicians know that working on the substance use issue will make you do your job better, because you'll be able to fill the citizens' potholes, which will get you more votes. So the whole point is, for every issue in a community, if we can share that relationship between that issue and those organizations that care about that, and how substance abuse and the work we're doing supports them, then we can build strong partnerships with those organizations. And again,
that's so cool. That's so cool how because really a lot of times we do get myopic in our view, right? And this slide is really challenging us to, like, that cliche of like going up to the balcony and looking down, like, to see those connections in that way that you described. It makes total sense. But when I first looked at potholes, I thought I was like making a reach, but it's not a reach.
No.
That's really neat.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And Nick, I want you at every training of mine. I love your enthusiasm. Thank you. So when we look at housing, and just an example of this, you may have people that are providing low-income housing, the housing authority in a community. And the coalition, if they don't know about the coalition, if they're writing a grant, they may not think to include some type of services to the people that live in those, in their housing. But if they know about the coalition, they can say, hey, we're writing a grant. and we would love to add some training for parents in our community so they can increase their ability to support their children, provide a healthy and safe environment for their children. Great, let's work with them to meet their needs of supporting their residents. And again, if they don't know about the coalition, how do they know to include us and work with us? So that way we're helping them. We're not just saying to them, hey, come to our coalition meeting. Other thoughts, any questions?
SAMHSA's got it in the chat, connection with traffic safety and under the influence while driving.
Yeah, exactly. Some people talk, and yeah, that's from Samantha. Yeah, so it creates a dangerous situation that costs money for people if they're, again, getting into accidents or avoiding potholes. That's another reason why we can connect with traffic safety even and say, okay, how can we help you decrease the amount of accidents or crashes that occur due to drinking and driving? Again, it's a great entree to have a conversation. Here's what we're doing. How does it support you? Let them answer it. I guarantee you they'll have an answer. And so one way to think about this and to operationalize this for coalitions is to start with and say, does the community really know about what we're doing? And this is where our vision, our mission, our strategies, actions, plans, accomplishments, and the outcomes, what we've contributed to the community to achieve. And the picture is the start of a puzzle. But if we look at those and we're able to clearly identify these aspects of our coalition, then what we can do is, if you look here, is think about how effective is our coalition at getting the word out about what we do. This isn't necessarily just asking people to come join us, but it's saying before they can build relationships with us, they need to know about what we're doing. So what all this puzzle is saying, looking at our ways we communicate. On the top is more electronic, social networking, websites, digital media. The bottom is more outside, but outdoor media, marketing, community events. How does our coalition, if we want people to know what we do, how do we communicate with folks? An example of this, and I'm going to go back to the previous slide, how do we share our outcomes? Does your coalition do a report card? Do we have an award ceremony where we acknowledge all the work we've done and celebrate all the accomplishments of our coalition? So how do we get the word out about all that? And think about the coalition is the sum of all its partners' work. So when we're celebrating ourselves, we're celebrating our partners, which is really celebrating the community. And how do we recognize our partners, going back to those 6 R's? And so it's really about this third element of being relevant to community concerns, is knowing that, yes, substance use and misuse relates to a lot of other issues, and then letting people know about what the coalition does and how we can possibly work together to address multiple issues in the community. And so really, when we're looking at this third element, we're looking at, again, just does the community know about what we're doing? How do we share what we're doing? And do we record our outcomes and share our results? And again, looking at, in Washington, you have great data, you have great survey data. You can make the case, or if your numbers are going down, you can say, great, our coalition has contributed to these numbers going down. If the numbers are staying the same or going up, we're seeing more substance use. We can say, hey, we've got a trending issue. We need your support. We need to work together on these different topics, and we need you to work with us as a community. So questions about this third thing in terms of building a sustainable coalition? So when you have, again, just summarizing, when you have a strong volunteer membership base, members who are committed, partners who see the work of the coalition, are involved in the coalition, we've got good, strong processes, data-driven processes that are updated. When the community knows about us, what we're doing is relevant to the community. Then we can say, the fourth element is to say, okay, how do we build the resources and how do we get the community to support the coalition and provide the resources to ensure the coalition's sustained? So here's where, again, you had me at hello. When the community knows about what the coalition's doing, they'd love to show you the money. So when we go through this, there are 6 elements here, and I'm just going to walk through these. And here's another example of where additional technical assistance and support, and just to recognize there's lots of different sustainability planning processes out there. This is one that really, builds on what the coalition is doing and the current status of the coalition. So there are 6 elements. We're going to walk through these. Again, just to provide enough information for you to go out and say, are we doing this as a coalition? And is this a process of developing a sustainability plan? And we'll show you an example. And for those that do have the handout, there is a sample community plan there that we'll walk through with you. But basically, we want to be able to walk through these 6 elements. So the first one is to create a case statement. And the case statement is really, and coalitions, I'll just say from experience, are notoriously bad at tooting their own horn. And they're very modest because they're engaged with partners. And we really need to be able to say, though, if we're going to be asking the community to support us, they need to know what we've done. And I can put my resources, whether it's my time or my money, I can go work with a lot of different volunteer organizations in the community. Why should I work with the coalition? So we need to make the case of why is the coalition needed? What's unique about the coalition? What do we do that no one else does? And I ask people to put in the chat box, what is unique about coalition work? And what is unique about our substance use and misuse prevention coalitions that no one else does in the community? If anybody has ideas about what's unique about our work of a coalition. You can't go to lunch till we hear from someone in the chat box. Sector representation, exactly. We have a lot of people who are involved with the coalition. There may not be other groups that pull different representative sectors of the coalition together. Excellent. I'll add one. We take on policy change, and we do our language environmental strategies around our needs assessment, which we do a data-driven needs assessment, which tells us our priorities, and we do community-level change as well as individual change strategies, comprehensive strategies to address these conditions identified in our assessment. So again, we use this process. We engage sectors. Not every organization does that, and we don't necessarily have direct funding from any one agency or organization to do it. We're a volunteer effort to pull partners together to do this. So that's what's unique about the coalition. How we make a difference, we use a data-driven process. Who's involved? These are all the sectors involved, exactly what you're saying. And are we cost effective? We know that for every dollar spent on prevention, we're saving 10 to 20 or more dollars depending on the study, but we are effective. We save time, we save money, we save lives in doing prevention. People need to know that about our coalitions. So there's a case statement. Again, the bottom line is, if I'm a volunteer or I have resources, why should I share my resources with the coalition? I have lots of places in the community. So we'll take a look at this. The second element is for the coalition, and this is again, and I'm just going to go back one more point here I meant to make is these discussions need to be done by the coalition members. And I know some coalitions, when they get to this point, will even form a sustainability committee and not let the staff be on it, not let the fiscal agent be on it, have access to that information. But this is about coalition members being able to make the case about why our coalition needs to be supported, what we do, what we want to support, what we need to move forward to keep this going, and how are we going to get the resources to do that. So this is critical for volunteers, community members to do this, because people own what they create. If they see the value of a coalition, they'll want to do this, period. So again, the first is a case statement. The second is identify what must be sustained. And here's where we look at what are the strategies that we do, what strategies do we need to do. Some coalitions say, well, our goal is to push strategies to partners. If we're doing compliance checks, let's start them and then we'll have law enforcement do them. So the whole point is, what strategies do we need to sustain as a coalition? We also need coalition infrastructure and support. So it's really having a discussion about what do we, as we move forward, what will we be sustaining? What strategies? Or we just know that we need to do 2 strategies a year, but to have that conversation about what kind of coalition are we going to be sustaining? What kind of work are we going to be sustaining? And then you can identify, okay, in order to do this, what does it take to run a coalition now? And here's where we need to look at the current budgets. If you have 3 or 4 funding sources, sometimes we see fiscal agents hold the money in close. They don't share it with coalition members. here's where we really need transparency, because coalition members need to know it takes $150,000 for us to run this coalition. And so if we're going to keep running at the same level, we're going to need $150,000 a year for the next X number of years. Coalition members need to know that. They need to know how the money is spent, what it takes to run a coalition. They may not know all the administrative costs. They may not know all the things it takes to run a coalition, plus to do activities. And this includes, when we talk about staff, that includes volunteer partners in terms of in-kind as well. It takes a lot to run a coalition. We need to know, for our level of activation, whatever it is now, what does it take to run our coalition now? Then we can jump into to say, what do we want our coalition to look like in some number out, 5 years? We like to say 5 years. We work with a lot of drug-free community coalitions who have 5 years of funding. So we say, what's it going to look like beyond that? So you're not relying on any one funding stream. Are we going to get bigger? Do we need to take on more drugs? Are we going to take on mental health? Right now we're working in a city. We're not reaching out to other communities in our county. We're going to need to be bigger to reach all those communities. Or we may stay the same. We like our level of activation. Or some coalitions even say, we need to get smaller. We're going to become more of a coordinating body. But this is where we say, we know in step 2, it takes $150,000 to run our coalition now. We know we're going to need to get bigger if we're going to take on opioids and underage drinking and marijuana and prescription drugs, and we're going to reach out the whole county. We need to get bigger, or we think we can do that staying the same. And so what basically you're saying, and this is why it's critical for coalition members to decide this, what are we going to look like in 5 years? Not how much money we think we can get, but what do we want to look like in 5 years? So in 2020 now, we may say, I said 150, it takes $200,000 to run the coalition in cash and in kind. And then in the future, how much is it going to take? But it's not how much we think we can get, it's what are we going to look like in the future as a coalition? Which gets to the fourth step, which says, okay, once we know how much we're going to raise in the future, whether it's 250, 150, whatever that number is, what are the ways we're going to obtain that? And again, the intention is not to go through these. The point here is there are, I think, 16 different ways identified here. There's lots of ways for coalition to obtain resources. And so here's our chance to be creative in diversifying. We don't want to put all our money, all our eggs in a basket, if I can say that, in grants. There are a lot of ways to do it. So let's explore how we're going to, what resources we're going to use to run our coalition in the future. And so it allows you to say, okay, we're going to use these 6 sources. We're going to have in-kind contributions. We need to keep up our members and partners and their relationships. We're going to have grants. We're going to do some fundraising. We're going to ask for donations. We're going to fee for services. We provide some great services. We can charge for those. And we're going to ask the county to put us in their budget for a line item. And so people will say that adds to $200,000. And so people will say, wow, we'll never get the county. They're strapped for money now. Well, they may be strapped now, but we have 5 years to build a relationship with the county so they will see that how vital the coalition is, that in 5 years they'll say, hey, we can't let this coalition go away. We need to put it in our budget to support it. The same thing with donations. People may not be willing. We're trying to get people to just come to our meetings, let alone donate. But in 5 years, if they see the value of what we're doing, they will want to see the coalition succeed. They'll be willing to support it. So this is thinking about how we can start thinking now about what our funding sources will be in the future. Which allows us to move to step 5, which is now we can start building those relationships with potential funders. So if we know we're going to be getting $70,000 from grants, let's start looking at potential funders either in our community, in the state, or nationally that fund the work we do and will want to do, and start building relationships. I was working with a coalition in Western Massachusetts, and there was the Western Massachusetts Foundation. We used to invite them to our meetings, and they'd come or they wouldn't. We'd send them all our material. We never asked them for money. Eventually, they wrote to us and said, hey, we have a grant coming out. We can't fund you directly, but we'd love you to apply. So they knew about us. They knew our good work. And so we got a $10,000 grant to do some parenting programming. So the point is, let's start building relationships with whether it's businesses in town who we're eventually going to go to, ask them to be making donations. Let's start building those relationships with people so that they see the value of our work, so that when we do finally ask for resources, they'll say, you had me at hello, I'd love to support you. I see the good work you're doing. So we always talk about starting with the handshake, not with a handout, building relationships with potential funders and resource providers. And then finally, the action plan is what we need to do now in order to start building those relationships. So again, 5 years down the road, we can have access to, we can ask those funders to support us, support the work of the coalition. So it's building those, how do we start building those relationships with people now? Questions about this, the 6 steps, or about this general concept of developing a sustainability plan? Comments? And so again, just looking at our time here, looking at our time, what we just want to emphasize is the sustainability plan is a template we've provided also in your packets, and a little bit short on time here, but encourage you to look at the sustainability plans that you see in the packets. And that just shows an example of everything I've talked about. And again, the plan focuses on the last thing, the 4th thing of obtaining the resources. This plan is a lot easier to put in place when you have done the first 3, when you have a strong coalition that's done work in the community, is using a good process. It's a lot easier to write a case statement that says the good work your coalition's doing and identify potential sources for you to go out and build those relationships with. So, and that's where the checklist comes in. Coming back to our checklist is to be able to say, are we doing these things? Where might we need support? In, again, this is the 4th thing, financial and other resources. Which brings us to the full checklist. And again, here's where the intention of this webinar, and thank you for staying with us. The intention of this webinar is really to provide information so you to go back and have those conversations to say, where do we need to work as a coalition? Where might we need additional support from CADCA, from any other resource or technical assistance provider to support us in doing this work? And I go back to the 3 points we made at the very beginning, is it's not about the money, it's about building a strong coalition. It's, going back to my notes, it's not about the staff doing it, it's about engaging the coalition in this process, and it's about the long term, thinking about how do we build a coalition now that'll be sustainable over the long term. So the next steps are to use the checklist, identify, work with coalitions to provide that discussion around what do we need to sustain, what work do we need to do now. And then the last piece here is of training and TA. I'm going to turn over to Erica, if I think we agreed, real quick, to let folks know what might be the next piece of follow-up for us to, if coalitions do this, or if some of the people do this, what can they do to get additional support and follow up on this? Erica?
Yeah, absolutely. So if, while working through this checklist and reviewing this webinar, if you have additional questions, reach out to me. I will include my email address in the chat, or you can reach out to your prevention system manager and they'll connect with me as well. And if we need to, we can do additional TA with Dave. We can explore that as well.
Thank you, Erica. And again, I just can't emphasize what a good support structure and resources are provided by the state of Washington. You've got some wonderful resources available. And I will go back to our slide share. Sean just reminded me there's one more slide. In addition to your great state resources, please feel free to contact CADCA at 1-800-54-CADCA extension 240 or training@cadca.org. That's free to coalitions. You don't have to be a member of CADCA, but that coalition development support is available to any coalition, so they can provide additional support on this as well.
And this, Jan did mention again that this will be, this has been recorded, so the link and the slides and the handouts will be provided on the Athena forum.
And I'd like to add too that the ORN is available at opioidresponsenetwork.org for any requests that can come from any of you for additional technical assistance.
And I'll just close by saying we will stay on here if someone has specific questions they want to follow up on. And also just thank you very much. It's been hopefully provided you with a starting point to have that conversation with your coalition. So thank you for spending your time with us.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dave and Nick.
Thanks, Jen. And Dave, I just, keeping up with the comments, just tons of thank yous and support for the webinar, that this was really helpful to folks. So a bunch of folks have typed that in. I just wanted to share that with you.
We had a good team in preparing for this, so thank you all very much.
I will stop the recording at the end of this webinar. So we are still online for questions.
Jen, I saw a couple of questions too. Maybe you could just let folks know how they might get the materials and the slide deck and the recording.
They will be provided to Erica, and I believe that she will post the link on their HCA website.
Yep, so I posted again, and I responded to Ellen that we will be posting it on the athenaforum.org. It usually takes a week or two, so we'll get that up shortly or as soon as possible.